As we continue in this lesson on installation and configuration of ADFS, we're going to go into this next sub-lesson. We've already gone through the deployment of ADFS as well as the configuration option, and now we're going to look at configuring authentication options for ADFS, because after all, that's the biggest part of ADFS, is making sure that we're authenticating and allowing users access to the resources they need access to if they're eligible for that access. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is claims-based authentication, which requires two tasks to be completed: configuring claims provider trust and then configuring a relying party trust. To configure the claims provider trust, we're going to use the ADFS management tool from within Server Manager. We're going to create a new claim rules by clicking on Edit and then adding a rule. And then we have 5 options in there. One is send LDAP attributes as claims. We're going to choose one or more LDAP attributes, and we're going to actually walk through this together. The second one is send group membership as a claim, which is going to send the claim as a security group member. Third one, transform an incoming claim, which is going to change rule types and optionally some values associated with those rules. Fourth one, pass through or filter an incoming claim, and that will only pass through if it meets a specific filter. And the fifth one is send claims using a custom rule, and I'm going to use this one only if none of these previous 4 rules will work for me. To do this, we're going to enter the name for the claim, and then we're going to click on AD as the attribute store list, because that's what we're going to be feeding from when we're using ADFS with ADDS. And then we're going to select the values for the LDAP attribute as well as the outbound or outgoing claim type. So those are the steps that we'll walk through together to configure the claims provider trust. In addition, we need to complete step 2, which is configuring the relying party trust. Again, we'll bebop into ADFS management. We'll click Add Relying Trust. This time we're going to click the Add Relying Trust to open up a wizard. We're going to click Claims Aware, then click the Start option. And then on the data source page, we're going to choose one of these 3 options, depending on where we're getting our data. We can import data about the relying party published online or on a local network. So that's readily available via the network. Or if we have something stored in a file, we can choose to import data from a file, or we can enter all the data about the replying party manually. So those are the 3 choices for the data source. After choosing the appropriate data source, we'll then specify a name of the trust in the display name box. And then we need to configure the next option, which is the access control policy. And you'll see we have several to choose from here. Permit everyone and require multi-factor authentication, or MFA. Print everyone and require MFA for specific groups. Same option, but from extranet access instead of groups. Same option, but from unauthenticated devices. Same option, but allow automatic device registration as my 4th option of permitting everyone and requiring MFA. We could also choose permit everyone for intranet access as well as permit a specific group. So lots to choose from when we're defining our access control policy. Then we're going to complete the registration on your Ready to Add Trust page to complete the configuration of the relying party trust. Authentication policies. We can define these at 2 levels. Globally, which applies to all of the services and apps that ADFS secures. And specifically, now we're going to drill in and choose what service or app that we want to secure using these party trust policies. To configure global authentication policy, back into ADFS Management Console, we'll click on Authentication Methods, and then we'll click Edit, and then we'll choose the type of authentication method that we want to use. We have Forms Authentication, Windows Authentication for your intranet only, Certificate Authentication, Device Authentication, and then of course Microsoft Passport Authentication. So those are the options that we'll see there. For device registration, we have to have Forest functional level of Server 2016. The device registration provides single sign-on with your own device or specific devices that I may have external from the intranet. The devices don't have to be domain joined, but they must trust the CA issuing certificates for SSL on your ADFS servers, and you can't use GPOs to add certificates. So that means you're going to have to distribute these certificates to the users individually. You have to configure the ADFS device registration service, which is also part of the ADFS Management Console. I'll show you a peek at that when we go out to our live image. We'll click Device Registration, and then we'll click Configure Device Registration to complete that configuration. Alternatively, we can use PowerShell. That command would be to initialize -AD device -registration. Let's step out and take a look at these authentication options that are available to us through ADFS. So we're back in our image here. We're going to go to Tools, and we have our ADFS Management tool here. It's available to us after the deployment of ADFS. We have 5 categories over on the left-hand side. In the center, we have an overview, and in the right-hand side, we have actions, add relying party trust, claims provider trust, attribute store, application group, all sorts of good options here. If I expand on service, we have several items within there. We have attribute store. Well, we already talked with ADDS. We already know we're Active Directory. And you're going to see in here, we can have an LDAP attribute store as well as a SQL attribute store. So we have a few options there. And if we go to the right here, we can add another attribute store if we choose to do so. I'm going to cancel on that. We have authentication methods. We talked about these here. If I right click and edit a primary authentication method, here we have for extranet, we have forms, certificate, device, and Microsoft Passport. We're going to talk about that in the next sublesson. Under intranet, we have forms, Windows, certificate, device, and Microsoft Passport. This is telling me right here, Azure MFA authentication will only be available once an Azure Active Directory tenant has been configured. So even if I go to the multi-factor tab, we have certificate authentication in Azure MFA. This domain has not been configured for Azure MFA, so we couldn't configure any more from here until we complete the tasks necessary with that tenant. We have certificates. We already know we have the one certificate at the domain level. Claim descriptions, all sorts of options we can work with, surname, role, given name, primary group SID, security identifier, and so we have a plethora of items in here. If I scroll down, you'll see that we have a ton more. We can also go to device registration, and it's telling us we can't register any devices because this also has to be configured at the ADFS farm. You must be logged in with an enterprise administrator to configure Active Directory for device registration, but this is where I would come in and manage those devices. Endpoints, scope descriptions, and the web application proxy. Now remember, we couldn't set up the web application proxy on our #1 domain controller because that's already an ADFS server. So we'd have to set up our web application proxy on another server. The web application proxy and the ADFS management console can't be running on the same machine. We also have our access control policies. If I want to add another one, I can right click, add access control policy. We'll go AZMTP, provide a description. Go ahead and click add a permission from specific groups. We'll specify the specific security group that we want to add. We'll use our GG. So I'm going to go ahead and click add, and then we'll use GG and check names that GG admins. And if I save this, we are creating a new access control policy specifically for that GG admins group. So that's how I would come in and do that as well. Let me cancel on these guys here. Here's my relying party trust. Again, right click and add another one. Here are the claims provider trust. Notice we have our attribute store of Active Directory. We can right click on that and edit a claim rule. And here are some of the out-of-the-box claim rules. I can add another rule. And we have a few options here. Send LDAP attributes as claims, group membership, transfer an incoming claim, pass through or filter an incoming claim, or send claims using a custom rule. We'll just stay with send LDAP. I'll go ahead and click next. We'll call this AZMTP as well. And here's our select an attribute store. We only have the one, which is AD. We can click on this and we'll just grab user principal name. And then we'll map that to an outgoing claim type. These aren't alphabetized, but we can map this user principal name to an item on the outbound if I want to do so. And then I would click finish after doing that as well. So that's how I would go in and configure a new claim rule if I chose to do so. And then we have the application groups. And I can right click and add an application group here as well. And these are your client server application templates and your standalone application templates. So this is where I would come in and work with authentication specifically to ADFS.